Hey guys, it's Josh, and welcome back to the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad, your favorite podcast for learning how to balance between being a functional adult and a bit of a raging dumpster fire. Let's be honest, some days we're all a bit of a dumpster fire. Joining us inside the Bachelor Pad this week is an amazingly artistic, creative, and just really down to earth guy. Welcome, Max Carey, to the Bachelor Pad, guys. Max, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation with you, Joshua. And let's get into it when you're ready.
Perfect. Now, everybody who's been a part of the Not So Bad family, I think even for us, this is going to be a different episode because we're going to strike the balance of not only educating you, but guaranteeing you some conversation that's going to leave you on the edge of your seat. Today, we're going to be talking about the world of kink, of BDSM, of really exploring your inner desires, okay? And maybe learning and unlocking some new desires you didn't even know you had. I have to start off by saying this. How did you even get into this space, Max?
Well, I've been lucky enough in my life to travel a lot, different countries and stuff. And I love sort of getting my misconceptions adjusted, going to these places and sort of seeing what we've been told and what the reality was. One day I found myself having a conversation with a dominatrix and realizing that as open-minded as I thought I was, I had a lot of preconceived ideas about what her life was. And she was sort of kind enough and generous enough to sort of go through it and sound very fascinating to me and became an opportunity to sort of enter a different world, enter a different subculture. It's a very guarded subculture. It's very sort of in the shadows a bit because of the current prejudice and current ideas people have about it. But she offered me sort of the golden ticket to get inside and to sort of meet people. So it just seemed like a really fascinating, interesting thing. And that was 7, 8 years ago now. And here we are, 7, 8 years later, talking about it.
Exactly. So you are just coming off finishing your film, A Touch of Kink. Guys, this is no understatement. I was just telling Max that I had to watch it twice because it was so enriching. It was so educational, and it also entertained you the whole time. There was never a part where I was like, wow, this is still going. I was more like, wow, this is still going. Like, I'm learning so much. And it was just shot beautifully. It really is a work of art in the truest sense. We're going to obviously talk about it a little bit, but after this, because I know you're going to watch this entire episode, guys, go check out A Touch of Kink. Go follow
Touch Kink.
Max.
Touch Kink. It's
Sorry, I'm
you're thinking the Orson Welles film A Touch of Evil. It's Touch Kink. Great film though, Touch of Evil. But no, this is just Touch Kink.
Thank you for that correction. Guys, go check out Touch Kink. That makes way more sense considering some people's kinks after you listen to this. But one of the first questions, well, I mean, you said that you had met this dominatrix and she kind of opened up and explained her life to you. I think that was really a great encounter for you because looking through her lens, hearing her story probably really helped humanize this whole world that we think is so taboo or it's mysterious because we're afraid to really talk about it. Along this process, what do you think was one of the most just humanizing experiences or stories that you encountered?
Boy, there's so many of them. The first was just getting to know her and finding out about the intelligence and how she was sort of a hobbyist and just very often. I mean, it's a funny thing. A lot of these dominatrixes and people like this are very, very gentle people. Very, very kind, very easy to get along with. I think that's part of the skill, I suppose, is that they can lure you in with this sort of softness, and when it's appropriate it's like okay. So it's that duality, I guess, and that's the thing that I tried to talk about a little in the film, and I believe personally is that we live in a culture right now. Everybody wants you to sort of be one thing. You're this, but nobody is just one thing. You could be, like you say, a dumpster fire by part of the time, and a highly organized, kicking ass, not taking any names the other times. And both of them are you. You're not one or you're the other. They're both sides of you, and but we have this duality. For some reason, our society isn't comfortable with that. If they'll remember you because, oh, you're a dumpster fire, that's how they're going to judge you, or they're going to remember you as kicking asses and taking no names kind of thing. But they have a hard time recognizing that you can be two things. And so when I started realizing that the kink world really is filled with people that, have two lives, and not in a bad way, and two sides of the personality. They can be the polite, they can be the person that sort of fits in, and they can also be this person that has these other interests, and both of them are true, and one does not judge the other, you know? I don't know what it is. I guess it's just sort of the news cycle or whatever, but we always remember people by the most scandalous bit of information. I think that's a shame. Or we judge people based on something we heard in the news. You know, all of those people from that country are coming to take our jobs or whatever, you know, just because it's silly, because we want to judge a person or a whole group of people with one brush. And it's never like that. It's, you know, it's we all have duality, and that's what fascinated me about the whole process is exploring, really, really getting into the duality and how extreme that can be. That was the first thing that I think really grabbed me, made it really interesting, and even from my own personal journey, you know, to be two people, to be you can be this and you can be that. And I don't know why it was so hard, why it took me so long to get there, but now I feel like I have that ability to, you know, be different people, which are all me, and be okay with that.
I love that. And that is so true. We are usually put into a box early on in life, and sometimes we don't get to make it out of that box. But realistically, I was like, we fit into so many different boxes. You're right. Each side of us, whether it's the high functioning side, the dumpster fire side, or that little dark voice in the back of us, those are all part of us. And we should really lean into embracing them
Absolutely,
because sometimes,
narcissist. Yeah, I was going to say absolutely. And sometimes I think the problem is society pushes us into a box. They
Mhm.
want you to be one thing, so they, you know, and you feel that too. It's like, well, a man's supposed to be like this, a person's supposed to be like this, and you can identify with some of those things, but you have to remember that this is kind of a judgment and a simplification, and that we have to break away from that. I often think that, you know, the truth is society treats us like children. It's like you're not smart enough, you're not informed enough to understand the nuances of, say, one group of people. We don't think you're nuanced and smart enough to understand that, you know, some of those people will be lovely people and some not so lovely, and some will be this and some of that. So we're just going to tell you they're all good or they're all bad, you know, because that's an easier message. Or, you know, don't say, just say no to drugs is a classic one. It's like, well, okay, but what about pharmaceuticals? And wait a minute, what about, you know, like, oh, alcohol? But that, you know, like they just want to give you simple messages because they don't think you're smart enough to understand the nuanced reality of our existence and the nuanced reality of everything. It's almost insulting when society tells us just don't do that or just don't think that or those people are bad. It really is. It's they're essentially saying to us that we don't think you're smart enough to understand the nuance.
on the other side of that is just don't question. That's a really big because when we don't question, it's easier to adopt this herd, this group consciousness, and we always talk about it, the dollar rules all. But one thing that I love about this film in particular that you've done, I think it speaks to so many different messages. And this might not even have been intentional, but I love the fact that you're right, society does put us in a lot of boxes or say that we should be this, that men are dominant or they, you know, shouldn't cry, shouldn't be super emotional. But I love how that there are a lot of men actually in this film who are not dominant. They are actually in a more submissive role and they love it. It fulfills them. It makes them happy. And I think actually just seeing that from their individual stories is so much more powerful than to be like, well, you know, a man should be able to express himself or be emotionally available. But actually seeing an actual application of that spoke miles to me. It showed me a vulnerable side, but it also really, I think it'll allow a lot of men or people who are interested in being submissive to go ahead and take this and just submit. I think that's a great lesson.
Well, we're all on a hierarchy, whether we acknowledge it or not. One of the reasons why I think culture is allowed to sort of bully us into being one thing is that the vast majority of people are more comfortable just doing as they're told, following orders and looking for some, you know, culture, society, and sometimes has become a non-consensual dom telling us how to behave and we're just following along. The truth is most people do want to just follow along. That's probably why the system works the way that it does. And we're all in a hierarchy. I always laugh. You put a bunch of submissive people together, and one will eventually emerge as the dominant in that situation, because there's always a hierarchy. There always seems to be in any human organization. There's somebody. Put a bunch of people together. Nobody wants to make a decision. You put them in a room long enough, and eventually someone's going to go, "Shouldn't we do something?" That's the most dominant person in that room. You know, so it's just natural part of human thing. It's like we're not binary. There's nothing. We're not digital. We're not on or off. We're humans. We're organic. We flow. We can be more this and more that, and that can evolve over time on 1,000 different levels. And that combination of whatever those levels and spectrum is, like music, you think about if high notes and low notes, dominance and say submission, and then you think of like interest in a particular thing as a kind of time kind of instrument. Where you the kinds of notes you're using and the kinds of rhythms you're using and the kinds that makes a beautiful note or chord, and that's sort of what it is to be human too. Maybe that's why music resonates with so many people, is that it's about harmonics, it's about chords and spectrums that find beautiful little balances, and that's more closer to what humans are than digital creatures that are black or white, or on or off, ones and O's.
No, I love that analogy. You're right. We all have resonance, and certain things, certain people just increase that are on the same wavelength. That's why emotion, connection, art are so vital, I think, to not just us as a society, but us as humans. Something about just being at home, resonating on a even relaxing frequency that inspires us to keep coming back. We also keep striving to reach that homeostasis, whether that's finding the right career where we're like, this isn't work, whether it's finding the right partner where it's not boring, but it's also not a struggle day in and day out. There's so many dualities, so many different nuances in this experience that really make life beautiful and vivid.
Yeah, and we have to recognize that it's always changing. We're like little boats on the ocean kind of thing. And we might be liking one thing for a while, but that will change as well. You might like some one kind of music and then different kind of music for different things. And we evolve and we change. Sometimes we can do that in an hour. Sometimes we can do it in a week. Sometimes it takes us a lifetime, but we're always evolving and changing. And being kink aware helps you be a little bit more open to that. One of the things that I enjoy the most about kinky people, and frankly, I prefer hanging out with kinky people now more than non-kinky people, simply because you can have those kind of conversations. You can have conversations that are a little out there, maybe, for people, but typically you're not going to be judged. I mean, just because you're kinky doesn't mean you're perfect, but people do have crazy ideas there. But you have a better chance of having somebody who's going to be a little bit more open to listening, a little bit more open to hearing what you have to say and thinking about it than people who just go, "Oh, that's wrong." So it's a great place to start because to do this stuff, you have to be very honest with yourself and you have to be very honest with other people. You have to be brave. I think that's a great start for all of us.
I agree. Now, I love that you're using the term kinky people because I think a lot of people, or the vast majority, do not know the difference between kink and BDSM. They think, or fetishing, I think they all just encompass that together. But there really are different nuances and roles within that.
Yeah, it breaks down that, if you think of the kink is like a house. Half the house is BDSM, the other half of the house is fetishism. BDSM, 80% of it is non-sexual. It's more about dominance, more about submission, more about roles, more about sensations, but often not sexual. And then the other side of the house, fetishism, it's, dress up in latex or fetishize a particular thing. It's more 80% about sex. But both of those things are under the roof of kink, and it's a big subject. So there's obviously going to be room for a lot of confusion.
You're right. I think one of the biggest bits of confusion that arise or that people don't realize there's such a vast separation, and you just kind of talked about it, is the difference or the separation of sensuality and sexuality. There are a lot of times when we can be sensual with other people, and that's intimate and emotional, that has nothing to do with sex. Where there are other times where there are things that are designed to arouse us, to get our blood pumping, to hit those erogenous zones, and they may not be super emotional in a sense. So I think that that is a huge distinction because sensuality and sexuality don't always go hand in hand.
Really. You reminded me though of the old Oscar Wilde quote about saying everything is about sex except for sex. That's about power. What is sex? Well, that's up to you. What's sensuality? Well, that's up to you. What's power? That's up to you. I mean, you can define labels are useful to get us to say the corner, saying main and second. It's useful to get you have those labels to get us to the corner, but don't take them as the end all and be all. Once you get to the corner of main and second, have a look around and see what you see. Don't just assume that that's all there is to it. Discussing what sex is or what kink is or what BDSM is, these help get you into the area. But once you're in the area, I think it's time to look around and have conversations about what does that mean to you? Because sex, sensuality, it could be the same thing for some people, completely different things for other people. Some people, they're asexual, not even interested in anything sexual at all. So, I mean, what does that mean to anybody? I think it just, get us to those places where we can have conversations. And all that really matters is if you're playing with another individual, you find out what they mean by that. What do they mean by this word, or what do they mean by that word? Because what you think it means doesn't matter. What they think, you have to come up with a definition between those two people interacting. And I also think that's another beautiful thing about kink is I'm not going to make any assumptions. When I interact with somebody who might be female presenting, I'm still going to ask them their gender. When they look like a big baddie, still going to ask, are you a dom or a sub? I'm not going to make any assumptions just based on of appearance. That serves you well too, because that flows. They might be, well, actually, I'm feeling more dominant with you, or I'm feeling more submissive with you. It may just be something, the feeling, the energy, whatever, but it's always moving. It's always changing. Some people think it's like, oh my God, there's so many conversations, so much trouble. This must be so difficult. I say, no, 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 no. You don't understand the beauty of this, because often you meet somebody and you're, say, out to get laid or something, and you want X, and that person maybe isn't ready for X. So, they say, no, no, no. And you walk away feeling disappointed. Well, if you really genuinely like the person, and you had a bigger sort of spectrum of possible ways to interact with this person than just this one way, you might discover three or four other things that that person would like to do with you and get to know that person better. And you know what? Sometimes you're going to end up getting laid anyway. So it's kind of having those conversations and being able to do that, and having an open mind will serve you well in relationships as well.
It honestly and truly, it really will. And I love the fact that I hope this starts to become more mainstream in the sense that people start to actually learn about it, because there are a lot of applications that can enhance your relationships, whether you are in kink or not. The fact of aftercare, we talked about this several times, but I think that is probably one of the most important qualities that I think that should be normalized, that everybody should do, whether you're in kink or not, because sometimes you do get swept up in the moment and things get a little heated with you and a partner, whether that's verbally, emotionally, or physically, when you're being intimate or not intimate. But the fact that, hey, this session has ended, coming to debrief, be like, hey, here's why this happened, or are we okay? I love that practice because it's super important, because you might think that everything's okay, but that might have been a little much for your partner, or vice versa. Is, hey, we talked about this. I know we did, but that's not what I expected. Or, it just stirred something in me. And I think that's really my definition of emotional intelligence and stability is, hey, check in to make sure that everybody's okay and to attune to fit those needs.
Absolutely. Aftercare should actually be part of the original negotiation, because it also informs your play. Because, the truth is, some people, the moment will be spoiled if you say, how was that for you? So they might say, look, my aftercare is slap me on the ass and send me out the door, because I don't want you to go, was that good for you? Because that'll sort of spoil the He-Man kind of experience I wanted to have. So you have that conversation before, and then you don't have to guess. You go through at the end, and your aftercare is, okay, Toots, hit the door. And that's what they wanted. Otherwise, you would have spoiled the experience for them. So having those conversations about what aftercare looks like for somebody in the negotiation phase informs you on how to play and how to end the play as well.
I agree 100%, because each and every experience is different. And we talked about a lot of things right there. So I'm going to go back and break those down. We talked about the negotiation stage. I think that's also a great thing that quote unquote non-kinky people should also be adapting. There is a lot of confusion and just lack of education around consent early on, which I am aiming to change slowly but surely, because I feel like if we did a better job of educating and practicing consent, we would know that, hey, that conversation can be really easy. It doesn't have to be super complex, doesn't have to be awkward or drawn out, but it gives everybody a sense of, here where my boundaries are, here's what I like, here's what I don't like, so that we can have a better play experience. And I like that. It sounds more fun. It's lighter than, a one night stand or like a one, I was like, just a play session. And you're right. The aftercare being incorporated into that conversation of, hey, I don't need this you emotional thing. We don't have to hug. We don't have to cuddle. it could, I could just leave. We'll see you next week. Or if you need something a little bit more, it's like, I don't want this to feel as transactional. That works too. But we just are afraid to have these conversations.
Absolutely. And the kink community not only has the conversations, it has genres of kink or type of kink. For example, a kink is quite popular. It's called 50s household, where the dominant, submissive grabs its dominant comes home, man or woman, it doesn't matter. Gender roles can be whatever they are. Comes home and, the submissive brings them his slippers and newspaper and a cigar and, so, basically doing fetishizing kind of how the world was in the 50s. There's another kink which is called primal, which is basically just like, okay, we're not, we're agreeing not to really agree. We're just going to be like animals fucking or animals doing whatever we do, and we'll take the brain right out of it. So you have both extremes already as part of a kink discussion, but you know what you're doing. You're both on the same page now. Yeah, we're going to have a wild one night stand. That's going to be the kink, and never going to call you again or whatever. But you can actually, these are things, and you make sure you know what people are agreeing to, and none of this stuff comes from nowhere. It's all based on human experience. I'm sure that there is kinks like living like the Romans, living like it's all part of the human experience. So when we think about it as a kink rather than some sort of cultural norm, lets us deconstruct and lets us realize that when we're negotiating, we still are maybe bound to some ideas. After the longest time, I was always very dominant. And I think I was just bound to, a guy's supposed to be dominant, because that was what my culture told me, So negotiation helps us explore who we are and explore where we are.
There's so many small points that get swept up as we talk about these broader topics. But two of my favorite parts of kink that I've learned are education and community, because they're really big at doing both. It's necessary a lot of the times, especially if you're newer to this space. You want to be aware of what you're really getting into. Also, they're not here to judge. They really do seem passionate about, like, if you're interested in being submissive or a dominatrix or a slave. Like, they do a really good job. Especially this film did a great job of showing these points, explaining them, so that if it is something that you're interested in, you know what you're really going for. Or it introduces you to also a lot of people who you might reach out to if you are curious or if you want to explore more. And that's really important, because sometimes it can be a little daunting just hopping straight in, because there are very distinct roles in a lot of these kinks, that you are in the right place and you're creating a safe and accepting environment.
Absolutely. And I mean, first thing you need to do if you're entering the scene is educate yourself. That was the notion of the film, is to give people a little bit of a peek behind the curtain and give them sort of a wide array of interests. And if there's something that they're more interested in, maybe they're more interested in rope, or they're more interested in this or that. At that point, then they can find books or materials or reach out to people that are more specialists in those areas. I was snickering a little bit because I do think that kinky people are not perfect either. Communities do have a way of wanting to circle the wagons, or once they find a little turf to sort of put a fence up around and say, well, we've got it figured out and everybody else is doing it wrong. That seemed to be something that groups of people seem to do, which I wish they would do a little bit less of, because I think the only way we're ever going to get over some of the problems we have in the world is to listen to people we may not agree with, and at least try to figure out where this came from. Why do you think these things? As opposed to just sort of demonizing them, And it often disarms them, because most people don't listen to each other anymore if they're on different camps. So when they actually have to explain it to someone who's genuinely listening, sometimes they talk themselves out of it, because they haven't had to do that for a long time. All their friends keep
Exactly.
telling them that it's a great thing, and then they're like, okay, but why do you think that? What, did you ever meet a person of this particular persuasion that, well, no. Well, why, what's your, well, because I saw this thing on TV. Oh, okay. What thing was that? And just, genuinely engaging. And then like, I guess, yeah, I probably really should talk to these people before I judge them. Crazy idea. Yeah.
It's such a simple notion, but to this day, people still struggle with it. They're just like, they love their opinions. And then sometimes they find yes men who also love that opinion as well. But you're right. Have you really talked to the other side? Have you explored it? Have you seen it with your own eyes? I think that's huge in making these decisions, because sometimes you're right. You're like, wow, maybe this isn't what I want to do. Or you're like, maybe I'm not this. Maybe I am a little bit more of that. I love that. And it speaks to our journey a lot, because we don't always check in with, sometimes before we even have these conversations with other people, really sitting down, maybe whether it's writing a list or just looking in the mirror, just thinking, meditating on what does this mean to me? And then that way, when I go have those conversations with other people and I'm genuinely engaging and listening, you're having a more enriching conversation and you might learn a few more things about the topic and yourself.
And just you don't always have to listen to people you agree with. And it's I don't think it's necessarily even useful to listen to people you agree with. I think that's the problem with social media right now is that everybody's in echo chambers reinforcing whatever their belief is. You need to have those conversations to sort of break out of that. And I never thought about myself as having privilege until having a lot of conversations with people that sort of explained the privilege that I had in my life when didn't really feel that way. But when you hear about other people's lives and what their experiences were, you're suddenly, oh, yeah, I guess I did. But you have to have those conversations to even know what those things mean. And if you're not willing to have those conversations, you're like, well, what the hell are you talking about?
That's so true. The easiest way to allow ignorance to continue is to not talk to each other. I feel like 90% of the times fill my camp with people who don't have the same opinion as me because if all you ever hear is yes, 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 or like you're right, when you hear you're wrong or you finally realize it, it's life shattering. You become the biggest fish in the pond and then you move up to a lake and you're like, I'm not prepared for this. I'm not equipped to survive in this environment. And that's a little scary.
It's hard for people. I mean, I think it goes back to us wanting to live simpler lives. There's nothing simple about the universe. There's nothing simple about anything. We all have unique experiences. So if you want simplicity, you're going to have to live with lies to yourself. And we can't always do it. I mean, let's be honest. If you're working 10 9 to 5 jobs and you got all these people to support and all the rest of it, last thing you really do, really get time for is sleep. You don't really want to get into conversations about, capitalism versus whatever. I just need to work and feed my family. Please leave me alone. We have to be ready for those kinds of conversations as well. But bringing this back to kink, it's like, kinky people, I think, have some sort of more innate understanding of these things and maybe more of an innate just appreciation for it. I mean, I learned more about transgender issues and race issues and, by having conversations with kinky people, which you'd think this is all about having a kinky conversation, but it's just about, well, I feel this way because of this, or I have this particular kink that is in response to that, and for me, okay, I give you permission to say this word to me because that's my kink, even though I know that you's not, these kinds of things that make it fascinating to hear the power, hear the reasons, and hear why people have these kinks and how they progress over time and how they inform us about each other.
I had noticed that kind of trend, that theme throughout Touch Kink is that our experience doesn't define us, but it does play a major part in maybe some of the kink that we're into, that we enjoy playing in. Somebody who is always on top, dominant throughout life, throughout the culture, may need a break and or really, it's just a charade. So like maybe they want to become a slave instead or be more submissive. People who have too much freedom in their life may be more into bondage. I think it's interesting how people kind of decide or are drawn into what area of kink they're in. And I think there's also a nice touch of control versus compulsion between the two, because there are some parts of the film where I was like, this is a very controlled practice. Like bondage to me seems like you have to be very controlled because you will hurt the other person. But there is this compulsion, of just being restrained or, you just giving in. So I love that. Once again, going back to the word we've been using all day, duality of it. But I think that's an amazing asset.
Absolutely. Well, it's, I always like the musical analogy because some's classical music, very controlled, has to be done perfectly executed or it doesn't work. And some of it's jazz, and it's all improv and it feels good. But it's like some people can do that. Some people can just make it sound good and break all the rules doing it and it still comes together. That's sort of improvisational jazz. And that's what some people can do. Some people need the discipline of, okay, there's this note, there's this structure, there's these bars, then there'll be this chorus, and like classical music. But that's just humans. It's like what skills we have. We do the best we can with whatever the universe gave us in terms of talent.
We do. We try to make the best. And sometimes we have to reshuffle those cards and play another hand. But let's really get into the film. I talked about some of the takeaways I had. What were some of the takeaways that you were hoping people would have after watching it?
The most important message for me is to try and explain the difference between abusive behavior and kink. You can slap someone across the face, and if it's part of a kink scene where it's been negotiated, this person wants this, you discussed how hard you're going to hit and how what you're going to do, and they have a safe word, and maybe you discussed a little aftercare, ultimately consenting to have that activity done. You slap them a few times, they enjoy the sensation of that, aftercare is executed, and go back to the beginning. How was that for you? That's perfectly fine. Whereas the same activity with none of that is abuse. So it's just this idea of the difference between what's, I don't know, like the word good or bad, but let's say human, compassionate, caring, and not, is whether there's a circle. And that circle starts with negotiation and conversation and openness, then moves to clearly consenting to a particular activity, then moves to doing that particular activity, and then moves to check in with that person afterwards, which slides back to negotiation again. It's that circle. If it's a circle, that's good behavior in my mind, no matter what you're doing. You're doing it in an ethical, in a compassionate, in a human way versus just straight ahead, punching somebody or doing something. If it's linear, if it's a line, that's wrong. If it's a circle, so it's not like, again, it's not about the activity, it's about the ethos behind it. So I wanted really for people, and I structured the film this way, to remember those four things. Hello, my name is, let's negotiate, let's talk, let's see if we can do something together. If not, okay, well, that can end right there. We do move to, we're starting to agree on something. Let's go to we'll consent to this, and we'll have a sense of what the aftercare is going to look like and what the play is going to look like. We get the clear consent, we do that thing, and come back around in the circle. I wanted people to remember that the most. And I wanted also people to, yeah, kinky people do seem crazy, but I think part of that is if you're going to play on that kind of level, there's no point hiding anything. A lot of vanilla people might wait till the first year of marriage before they admit to something, because they're so afraid their partner's going to run away. This woman or this person that they're interested in is going to run in fear when they find out this. So you don't find out about some of these deeper issues. People don't talk about them. Or kinky people, it's like one of the first things. Oh, I got PTSD around this. I had this trauma because of that. And it's like one of the first things. So it seems sometimes that people have more mental issues, but I think it's really just that they're more willing to talk about it, and it's a more pivotal part. Everybody's a dumpster fire. I mean, and if they're not, I'm very suspicious. I'm very suspicious if anybody comes across, is perfect in every way. I think that's just a nuclear explosion waiting to happen. We're human. That is what it is to be human, to be messy. So I trust that more than I trust the shiny happy people.
I'm in the same camp as you. I often say this: people that are too nice, or you're right, who are just ticking way too many boxes, it's either too good to be true or the pressure is about to peak. And I don't really want to be on the other end of that. And that's why I think that we all should be a little more kinky, in the sense that we should be more honest with ourselves. We should be more inquisitive. We should be more exploratory. I think those things will help release some of the stigmas that are around multiple different aspects of life. And also, this, guys, I don't say no to pleasure. I love pleasure. And when you adapt those three practices, you're exponentially compounding the amount of play, the amount of pleasure that you can be having in your life. And I mean, life's short. Why not enjoy it?
I've had so many conversations over the years where I might have been looking for A, and through the conversation, I learned about something completely different and decided to give it a go because I had that conversation. Whereas if I was just sort of obsessed with getting A and didn't know about B, C, D, and E, and F, I would have walked away. And instead, because I kept the conversation going and asked that person what they liked, oh, B, so tell me more about this thing you're talking about, and what is that, how does that actually work? You have more experiences too, and you get to interact with people in new and interesting ways, and who knows, you might develop some new kinks along the way too. And what is a kink really? It's just a way of connecting. It's connecting on something. It's like you connect on something. People sometimes bond over music. Sometimes people bond over all sorts of different things. So you bond over my interest in wearing rubber now, or latex, and I want to know exactly why do you spend so much time and so interested in shining boots? Why is that? What does that mean? There's a whole part of the community called boot blacks, which are people that are kind of like at the social nexus of the leather community, and they're the people polishing your boots, but they're also the directories of the community. They're also like the places to get information about what's going on. They're kind of like, they love being of service to the community, and it's interesting, and they genuinely love that. In many cases, there's nothing sexual about it. It's just a genuine desire and enjoyment of being of service to others, which is sort of a beautiful thing too.
No, no, no. You're completely right. And that world is so large, and there are always new kinks being probably formed every day. Throughout your experience with this, like I said, you have there. I don't think I can remember the exact number off the top of my head, but we get a lot of viewpoints from different people throughout this experience. Was there any one interaction that really stood out to you, or you felt like you learned the most from?
It's in the movie. There's so many experiences that I had in the time making the movie that I wish I had filmed. But making the movie, I think probably Robin, just how honest and folksy he was about explaining his kinks and his proclivities, in spite of the fact, growing up in Texas, where he was definitely, different than most people in his community. He had different interests, and he somehow bravely found a way to sort of be that person that he wanted to be. And I can imagine how hard that would be. It's easier to in some, in a lot of places that are more open, it's a little bit easier to be kinky. If you're that person that wants to be kinky in your very repressive society or very repressive culture, it's a hell of a lot harder.
No, you're right. And he did, like, from the very first time we see him, he's just so authentic and his experience and who he is. He understood who he was. Obviously, he had been doing this for, I think, over a decade at that point, or at least a decade. And it was a journey. I'm pretty sure day one he wasn't like that, or it took some time to develop not that character, but just develop that confidence in who he is and what he wanted. And he pursued it. He
Well,
found a
he
way.
found out very early. He talks about it in the film, and I think a lot of people discover their kinks quite early. It's, usually when you're just starting to have sexual thoughts or whatever, it can be a lot to do with what's around you. A lot of Americans have boob fetishes because maybe they grew up going through Playboy. A lot of people in the English world have caning things because in the old days, when you're a bad boy, they would whip you with a cane. So a lot of the English guys have that thing, which North Americans don't even know what that's about. So it's not really a North American thing. In the Muslim world, a lot of people have foot fetishes because they're growing up the feet of women. So that's the naked bit that they're seeing. What's going on around us? And in his case, I think he said, that he'd get in trouble and the teacher would spank him or, get the old, and he liked it. So he kept getting in trouble so that he could get hit more. So, I mean, I think he knew very early that he enjoyed being hit by a teacher for some reason.
I mean, once again, I was like, that's something that I'm pretty sure a lot of people can relate to. Is we all have these thoughts. Well, I mean, like you said early on, he knew we all have these thoughts, we have these ideas, but it's the expression. I think that it takes a while to figure out how we enjoy it the most, or where can we get it from.
Well, I think it also
So,
takes giving ourselves permission. I mean, the hardest part, I think, is not knowing what we want. The hardest part is letting ourselves talk about it or think about it. We have the
mhm.
society saying, no, you can't do that. You're smart enough, you're not good enough. That would just be weird. You don't want to be weird. You don't want to be a weirdo, do you? No one wants to be a
Right.
weirdo. So, there's this concept called the Overton window, which is an interesting concept because you see how fluid this is. The concept is that what's in the middle of the window is perfectly acceptable in a given society. What's at the edge of it is edgy. What's out of it is we won't even have those conversations in our society. The interesting thing is it's different in different countries. In Europe, for the most part, the violence is added in movies. Like they don't want to see as much violence. It's really something is hidden a lot more than in North American culture. Yet nudity, you watch a shower or a commercial for, some body soap, and you're seeing a girl naked in the shower using the soap at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on daytime TV, because they're more comfortable with nudity. Where in North America, it's like, I remember that whole Janet Jackson nip slip thing. The Europeans thought we were kidding, that there's actually people that really think that that's going to be marring them, or that, oh my God, these children, they're going to be ruined by this. I hope the children saw nipples at least once in their life. Anyway, it's just a bizarre thing, but it just speaks to the fact that what we think is normal really is situational in a given culture or subculture, and there's no universal truth. That's why I loved to travel when I was young, because I grew up a kind of a weird kid in a very conservative town. And I was frankly suicidal until I started to go to the rest of the world and realize, okay, good. Other cultures do think differently. Other cultures do have different ways of doing this. There isn't this sort of one way of doing it. And when you start to discover that, you realize how arbitrary all this stuff is. But at the same time, you realize, you just have to find places where you can flourish, or you have to find the strength to flourish in places that may be against you, you know? It's why people move to different parts of the world to, if they're interested in different things. It's like, hey, we're going to a musical park because everyone's a musician there. I go do that in New York and everyone's going to think I'm a bum. Whatever. We go to places that give us the permission to be who we want to be, you know?
I've not even thought about it that way because we talked about this before we started recording. Is you spent a lot of time traveling when you were younger. I travel a lot. I love doing it. But people always ask me, do you ever think you'll go back home? Or like, why don't you love it here? And I think that really just hit home for me because maybe the places I've been, I feel like I haven't had the permission to be my authentic self, or I haven't found, I think I'm just kind of looking for an environment where I feel like I am given the permission to express each and every bit of me authentically without repercussion. So I think maybe people who travel a lot, let's ask yourself that. Do you think that that's one of the reasons you're traveling is because you're looking for that permission? Or people who are happy where they're at? Why? That's a great point.
I think it's just everybody's different, of course, and I'm happy being back in the Western world now because I feel like I can play nice by the Western rules. I mean, Luxembourg, it's one of the most conservative countries in the world, and has its advantages. The streets are very clean, and everyone drives nice cars and seems to be paid well. But the spectrum of political thought is probably fairly limited in the spectrum of whatever. But I can be that in my private life now too. So I feel confident enough to be who I am, but also confident enough to be who I need to be here. And then, we're circling back to the beginning of this conversation about duality. So I think it's an important concept for people to really get. It's you can be polite. You can be, if I'm coming over to your house, I'm going to learn the rules. I take my shoes off or don't take my shoes off. I bring a gift or I don't bring a gift. I bring an orange or I bring a case of beer, a bottle of wine. I mean, whatever it is, I'm going to find out what your culture is and I'm going to respect you. It may not be mine, but I'm still going to be a polite person. Find out, what's the protocol when I visit your family or you. If we get to know each other a bit more, then we can have discussions, but you can be both people. You could be that polite, civilized person that tries to show respect for your cultures, whether they agree with the practices or not is irrelevant. It's just respect, respecting another human being. And you can be that, and you can still be your crazy, kinky self. You can be the dumpster fire too. Civilized man on one side, dumpster fire on the other. And again, one informs the other, one doesn't preclude the other.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many things that we can go to and we can spend a lot of time talking about this, but I want to give the audience a chance to get to know you a little bit better. I don't know how I missed asking this at the beginning of the shoot, but the name of our podcast is The Not So Bad Bachelor Pad. What is your current relationship status? We taken? Are we still exploring, looking for stuff? Are we
I'm always
happy?
going to be exploring, but I'm in a very solid relationship right now, in a committed relationship, which is kind of new for me. I'd always been pretty poly, but very happy with that. I think again, it's like I explored polyland and explored kinky land, and now I'm weirdly enough cutting into a 50s household situation, which I like. So currently, in a relationship, not married, but common law. I have a beautiful bouncing baby boy of late, which is kind of nice too. It's great to watch kids grow up. So yeah, happy.
Well, that is great. It's funny how how you'll spend so much time in an area, and then next thing you know, the happiest you've ever been is in something completely different. But like you said, who's to say that doesn't change? Maybe this is just a season. That's the role you're in.
I like
One of
both.
the
I like being the family, the family thing, and I also like going to the kinky party every now and again too. It could be both. You could be a good father and a wild, crazy Kinkster at different events too. You can be both things. That's the whole point, is that we weren't not going to oh, you're now a family man. Oh, my life must be well. You can do both, as long as you do it with consent and you do it with clarity and you do it with people that understand, that trust me enough. My partner trusts me to go to kink parties on my own. She knows I'm not going to be banging anybody. I just enjoy. She knows I love to talk, and I enjoy talking to people more than anything else. And so she's comfortable with that, and she knows me well enough that that's cool. You know, if that changed at some point, I'd have more conversations. But you can be, it's the whole, again, duality, duality, duality. You want to define a bachelor this way or a kinky person that way or a person from X land this way, but we're all more than that.
No, you're completely right. And I think once we start accepting the fact that you can be, this has been my saying this year, two things can be true. Once we start accepting that two things can be true, we can have two different sides to us. We can live two completely different lives as the same person. I think the world will kind of be an easier place to exist in for a lot of us. Now,
Absolutely.
now this is a question that I had, and I think we kind of talked about it earlier, but I just wanted to zero back in on it. Before you had interacted with that dominatrix, had you considered yourself a kinky person, or had you been curious about kink prior to that?
I considered myself someone who was very aware of the fact that, the culture was changing and that relationships between men and women were changing. There was no common set of rules. So I was very, very into consent, very into having conversations. I knew that I liked particularly sort of dominant situations, dominating women to some extent. I knew that that was sort of going against the flow. So I sort of informed myself, what that was and could be able to articulate it. So I was stepping in that direction, shall we say. And then I read a book called SM 101 about 11 years ago that one of the first things it says, if you discover that you're a dominant, you're actually quite lucky because there's not that many of you and you'll be like this, and this. And then I realized that, oh, okay, there's a language, there's a whole culture that recognizes that. I'd always been into clear consent and talking to people about what I was interested in, frankly, because thought I was too pretty to go to jail. And I knew some of the things I liked were a little bit more edgy, but I didn't really put it into the world of kink until about 12 years ago.
Okay. I mean, so you've kind of been floating around this community, been a part of this community for over a decade. That I'm sure that like your perspective has changed so much from day one to today about, like you said, just defining what it means to be kinky or vanilla, and how can you apply those practices for you in the best possible fit. So that's amazing.
Absolutely. I think part of it is your nature too. Some people are more naturally this and naturally that. And then some people, it's also nature versus nurture, I guess, right? We're born with certain skills, but then we also learn certain things, and both things can be true. So you might have a proclivity to be a little more dominant or a little bit more submissive naturally, but then as you become informed by your life experience, those things change and evolve. Whether you know it or not, you're probably kinky. I think most people are actually, whether they know it or not. They may not have the words to do it, or they want to say, "Oh, those other people are kinky." But the truth is, we all have kinks. We all have fetishes. If you like someone because they have beautiful eyes, guess what? That's a fetish. Everything's a fetish. I mean, if you unless you're saying, "I sincerely like this other being," but then actually you might say, well, I have a fetish for beings, whatever you say. Like, it's all, what is a fetish? I actually like to step away from this stuff sometimes and just back the whole train back up here, folks. This isn't weird. We all like what we like. We all feel who we are at a certain time. Maybe that's a long, if it's a lifetime, maybe call that an identity. If it's for a few minutes, we'll call it a role play or whatever. But we all feel a certain way at a certain time, and we're all looking for a certain sensation. Maybe we want to get off. Maybe we want to feel proud of ourselves. Some people like to be humiliated, even, but that's it. We think we like what we like, we see who we are, and we want a certain sensation. That's it. And that's everything, and it's all the time. You know, I like money. I see myself as a businessman and I want to feel proud of myself. Now I like boobs and I'm going to be a dominant man and see if I can, get this person to interact with me. And I'm looking to have an orgasm. It's always those three things back, on everything. We want what we like. We're fascinated with what we are. We like it. We fetishize it. Fetishize is just a strong word, giving it a more of a sexual component. But then again, you have a whole conversation what sex is. The role, well, identity role, I don't want, there's smarter people than me get into that stuff all the time, but in its basic form, it's just who you feel you are in any given moment. And you just want what you want. That's it. Back it all up, and by those definition, that is kink. We're kinky about everything, you know? We want what we want.
So true. And I said this early on. I was like, kink is such an accepting community. And I think more of us are in it than we think are in it. Like you were saying, we all have a kinky side to us. You may not know it, that there's a definition for it, or you might think that your kink, your fetish isn't a thing, but there's really not really an original thought. So I was like, if you thought it, chances are at least two or other people have thought into it as well. Therefore, you're doing yourself a disservice by not exploring it.
Maybe you're not ready to. I mean, I often think as I get older, it's like, okay, I'm not going to put this down anybody's throat. Maybe you're not ready for this conversation right now. Maybe you've got some other stuff you have to unpack first. We're complicated creatures, and we can only maybe deal with one thing at a time. And if we're unpacking some other issues, some other problems, maybe we have to do that first before we can go. This is sort of on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is you know, way down on the list, food, shelter, self-actualization, then kink. Kink is sort of
Yeah.
extreme self-actualization. It's really the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maybe we got other things to do. We got to deal with the food shelter thing first, It's no
No, you
coincidence that the richest countries in the world and the most educated people have the highest percentages of kink. Sweden, Scandinavia, they there's like 48% of people self-describe as kinky. Places that are more conservative, it's like 1%, because it's just not something they know anything about, and they don't have really the time and discussion to even identify that way. So it's not that they aren't, it's just they don't identify that way, or they're more closeted about it.
I was like, self-actualization is sometimes a luxury for people because we've been talking about this a few times during the season. Is there are a lot of people who are just stuck in a fight, flight, or freeze mode. So that's all they can focus all their energy to. But once they exit that, then they can start working on some of the other aspects of life that actually constitute life. I say a lot of us are existing. Not all of us are living.
Absolutely.
It's a big distinction I like to.
Everybody's got a life, but not everybody's living. Yeah, it's true.
Alrighty, well, Max, thank you so much for coming on and talking today. Guys, tOuch Kink is an amazing tool if you have ever had a thought or you just are curious about kink, about BDSM, about what's going on right in the back of your head. I would honestly give that a watch. Then from that, like Max was saying earlier, educate yourself. There's probably an event around you somewhere easy to get to and start living your best life.
Absolutely.
But before we get out of here, I have to give you time. Where can we find you? What do you have coming up? What's next for you?
Well, touchkink.com. Touchkink.com will get you information about where the screenings are, and it's available for video on demand. My next project, I'm working on a series called The Provocateurs, which is about sex and technology. I've always believed that sex drives tech and tech drives sex. It's a bit like, hey, most of the modern world, whether you realize it or not, was invented by kinky people, driven by something. I mean, the computer was a gay man. Da Vinci was arrested for crimes against nature until the Medici's got him out. I mean, pretty much every great mind was an open mind and was a mind that, by most definitions, would have been kinky. So explore those things. And I think that there's an interesting thing between being open and sexual and passionate and driving technology. And technology feeds one of the others, this circle that's been going on forever. I mean, Horn basically made the internet, and now it's just fascinating how one has always driven the other. And I'm going to explore 10 stories about that particular subject.
Well, I cannot wait for that project to be done because, I mean, I can already see some avenues and the evolution of how technology and porn or sex have kind of been hand in hand from phone operators to now you have OnlyFans models. So once again, as one elevates, as does the other. So, like I said, I'm super excited for that. Guys, thank you so much for making it this far down through the episode. Make sure you share this episode with a friend who you think isn't as vanilla as some of the others. Make sure you leave a comment. I'm going to be sure to add all Max's links that he just gave you down below in the description so it's easier for you to access. And until next week, we'll see you for another episode.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.